hard drive space. Ooh, in progress. I love it. Okay. Well, welcome once again to our best practices for hybrid meetings. Tonight, we have two special presenters, and I would like to introduce them as actually, my friend Dave Hansen, who I've worked with for a number of years. He's a distinguished Toastmaster. Craig Weckworth as well, both from Rochester. Both of these individuals are Zoom producers of the Rochester Chamber Toastmasters weekly hybrid meeting broadcast. And before we get started, I'd just like to ask Dave, Craig, how did you guys get started doing this, and how long have you been actually conducting hybrid meetings?
Well, we pretty much went to Zoom almost immediately right after COVID hit. Because we may have missed a meeting. I was going to look back and see how many, I think maybe one, maybe two, but I don't even know if we missed two meetings. And we went right into Zoom meetings after that just to keep the club going. And it was actually quite easy to get going. There's a lot of learning curve getting started with that, but it was just fun to see people's faces again. And then we operated for until about 4 months on Zoom. And then we went to a hybrid type of approach.
Amazing. Go ahead, Dave.
And we have a really wonderful leadership crew, and they just weren't satisfied with the idea of doing a virtual meeting. I mean, that was all well and good, and it's very important to keep the club together, but it was quickly decided that if we were going to do a virtual meeting, we were going to have the space in order to do it, because you're familiar with that catchphrase from about a year and a half ago, social distancing. Well, our old home, Rochester Chamber Toastmasters, and their wonderful conference room suddenly became off limits to us. And it is still pretty much off limits to us right now. And we'll explain that here in just a few moments. So the big trouble is, okay, great. So you want to take this to the next level. You want to do something that includes real people in a room, and then you want to incorporate social distancing, and then you also want to incorporate the virtual element. How are you going to do this? And the lucky part for us is one of our members actually is a co-owner of a bar/meeting hall, VFW hall, Elks Club hall, let's put it that way. And so he actually has a rather large room available to us on a weekly basis when we show up for our meeting before 7 a.m. And so that was available to us, and we could spread out, we could do all the social distancing, and then we could also incorporate the electronic element, the virtual element, if you will, and try to include the folks in the room as well as the people out there in Zoom land, and try to bring this all together. And of course, it started in a very fledgling fashion, but I have to hand it to my co-producer, Craig. He is very knowledgeable when it comes to Excel, other aspects of the PC. He does some virtual meetings on the side himself. Myself, I have a television background. I understand something about audio. I understand something about video production. So it was kind of a meeting of two different people that come from different directions, but we both can see where our talents could come together here and create a halfway decent broadcast. And then of course we can start thinking about how we're going to add some variations to it, add some additional bells and whistles, and continue to build on what we're doing. And of course, it's been a work in progress, as I've tried to describe it in a speech, as I tried to explain it one day, essentially using that cliche, we're building the airplane as we're flying it. And depending on what new twists, new innovations we decide to bring along on a weekly basis, that's exactly what we're doing. And we're 9 times out of 10 able to make it fly and not crash and burn. And that's a really, really good thing. And especially if you can get the audio right in your meeting, that's something a lot of people will certainly appreciate. Craig, any additional thoughts?
Just that our club is very patient with us as well. There's been a few times when we look at each other and say, well, that didn't work. And it just goes goes over fairly well. Everybody kind of cuts us some slack. They know what happens. We haven't really had a meeting that has crashed and burned in terms of the hybrid approach on this thing. Knock on wood. We've had a couple that had a little dings in them, but usually it's something we can recover from. And it's just learning experiences all the way through. And again, patience. And we've even had to restart in the middle of a couple of times. The first one that we did on Zoom, we did over a free Zoom account, which automatically ended after 30 minutes. That was real nice in the middle of the 1 hour meeting, and try to get everybody back connected again. Little things like that we've learned, but I think a lot of the lessons will probably pop out as we talk through some things tonight.
And there are a couple of other factors too that you'll want to pay attention to. Number one, your internet signal and how strong it is. And we're going to talk about that as well. And then also, of course, once again, getting the audio right, because it's pretty easy to get the video right. But if you can't get the audio right, your visitors, certainly your club members are going to cut you some slack, but your visitors are just going to say, to heck with this, and give up on you. And probably the nicest compliment we got from somebody was a visitor from South Africa, who we allow people to have a comment at the end of the meeting if they're a visitor, and they had some nice things to say about it. And they said, I was really worried about your audio, but you guys have this figured out. And that was a really nice thing for her to say.
And I think that's been one of the funnest aspects of this all year long, is getting all the different visitors. People all over the world have come into our club. We've had people from so many different countries and so many different time zones, people that are up in the middle of the night to join us. It's been really fun that way. It's fun to get their comments, fun to get their perspective on things.
It's always an adventure. And then we've also had some clubs, like we've got one in the southern part of Kentucky. We have a gentleman there who I believe is a Toastmaster or one of the officers there. And he has come back to us several times and joined us at least once or twice, and had some in-depth discussions about how to use equipment, how to get this going, and how to make it happen. And we're more than happy to talk about what we have. And if any of our knowledge is something that he can potentially use, that's great. Tell you what, I'd like to
gained at least,
go ahead.
Let me just say, we gained at least one member from having a hybrid meeting, because we had Hannah from Chatfield. Hannah's 78, I believe, but she did not want anything to do with Zoom meetings, but she didn't want to give up Toastmasters. And she was so glad to find out that we had a meeting in person. And she was, for a while there, it was 5 middle-aged guys and Hannah sitting around in Charlie's. And over the course of the past year and a half, more and more people have trickled back into the room. And we probably have more people in the room now on a regular basis than we do online. But we still have several people that we've not seen in person since the beginning of this thing.
Yeah, this is true. And Hannah is somebody that likes to have a meeting in person. And we of course have found it very beneficial as far as keeping the club together. Even if you can't make it in on a bad weather day, it is good to come in virtually, and it just keeps the club in touch. And at one point, we actually had a member that was out in Boston and another one that was out at USC in California, and we could say we're live from coast to coast. And always a nice thing to boast about when you've got your virtual hybrid meeting. It's a very nice thing.
We had
Craig, should we?
Yeah, well, they didn't know they were going to get their Q&A in advance of the actual presentation. And they're wondering, how long is this presentation going to be, since we're talking so much. I just had to share the story about Ashley, who joined up while we were in hybrid mode and had never been to a live Toastmasters meeting. She attended for almost a year as a new member, did her icebreaker online and the whole works, but never came in person until late, like I say, after a year. She walked up to the front of the room, stood behind the lectern for the first time, and went, wow, this is different. Because it's such a different experience being in person. And hybrid gains a lot, but it can't replace that standing in front of physical people. So yeah, we can talk now.
Okay, sounds great. Let me share a slide right here, a slide presentation, and let's see here if we can pull this up here. I'm going to try to find my slide presentation among a bevy of possibilities here on my screen. And here we are. the way we were. Actually, believe it or not, this photo was actually taken this morning. This is our old conference room. We actually had a wonderful 80-inch monitor over to the left-hand side here. And you can see there's probably about 7 spots right here. This is how distanced our old chamber meeting space. This is how distanced they really want to be. I don't think they want more than 7 people in this room. And we used to pack up to 30 plus, depending on what kind of a morning meeting it was. So, definitely we had to move on and get to a different location. This is the way we are right now. This is if you were standing up at the lectern and looking out in our room. Remember, we did say that it's a very large room that we can adapt and move the furniture around on a weekly basis. And this is what we're able to do. And if you were standing at the lectern, you would be not only staring at a camera, but you would also be staring out at your audience right there, your live audience. And there's a virtual one on the monitor below. We'll talk more about that as we get going here. I want to talk about some basic hybrid gear. And if you think that you really need to have a lot of gear to get into one of these meetings, you really don't. This is a club. I'm not quite sure where the East Side Club is, but I grabbed this slide because I thought, this is a really, really basic setup, and why not? It works fine. This lady is standing in front of a tripod here, and on top of that tripod is a smartphone. And this acts as their camera for their meeting. That's it. Stand in front of the camera and you're the speaker. Over here, we have a tablet, which is actually shooting out into the room and actually gets a picture of the room. And obviously they've got their audio on here. That's rather primitive. And you can see up on the monitor on the wall here, this is actually a shot of the audience. As small as they are, that's them. They're in the meeting right there. And then also there are some HDMI adapters that are feeding back into this TV from the camera here on the tablet itself. And again, this is as basic can be. This guy, while we're just seeing one person right here, I assume they have more than one virtual person, but they probably have several people that the folks in the room can see here that are a part of the virtual meeting. So that's as basic gets right there. This is a much larger gathering here, and this is more in terms of what we're doing right here. Over here, it's a little bit confusing the way this photo is set up, but this phone on the stand here is actually shooting over to a speaker. That's who they're capturing. I'm assuming that they're not just looking at beautiful shoreline video over here on this large projector screen. They actually probably see the folks that are out in Zoom land. And I notice here that they've got a really nice camera here that they're usually using to shoot the audience, which is fantastic. And they also show you over here that they have a laptop that's controlling it, got HDMI cables. The key thing I want you to get out of this is notice that they're talking about having the speakers deep into the room here beyond the microphone. The reason for that is they're trying to avoid feedback problems. If I'm taking my microphone in most of these setups, if I have it over here in front of this speaker, that's great. But as soon as I take that microphone and cross over here beyond the speaker, chances are I'm going to end up with feedback. And that's not such a good thing. And that's something you have to be concerned with as you're doing audio on these meetings. Let's dive into some gear and let me make some basic points about some of the major aspects of putting on one of these meetings. To go with Wi-Fi or to go with Ethernet cable. If you go with Wi-Fi to run your meeting, that's perfectly fine. But I have to tell you, you're rolling the dice, at least in my estimation. I don't know if you've done it before, but I have actually played Toastmaster for some meetings right here with this setup and not had my laptop wired into an Ethernet connector that goes back to my router. The big problem with that, though, is about halfway through my meeting, suddenly I start getting these messages from Zoom that says, your internet signal is unstable. I don't know if you've ever had that before, but that really is frightening. And what's even more frightening is if I'm supposed to be Toastmaster and suddenly, voila, I just fall right off the table because my signal has faded. And So suddenly my meeting is out there running virtually someplace and I'm not around. I have to log back in and get into my meeting. And that's because I'm having signal fade due to the Wi-Fi setup and trying to run a meeting off of just a signal coming out of the air. And that's why you would want to use your router. Best practices recommendation, this is number one right here. I would use your router that you have. Chances are you've got one of these at home. And what I would do is I would get an Ethernet cable, and you can get the adapters. It's not that hard, and run this to your laptop and have a hardwire connection. And that really is the way the professionals do it, because they cannot countenance meetings that crash and burn halfway through them, especially if they're getting paid for it. And that is something that you're going to want to do for your meeting, just greater reliability. I've got some pictures here of some laptops. We actually use 2 of them in our meeting. We'll talk more about all of it. The point I want to make here as I show off these laptops is use newer equipment if you possibly can. The newer, the better, because you're looking for a certain level of processor. If you go back and look at the Zoom specs, Zoom is really good. They talk about all their specs to make everything happen. And you'll notice that they start talking about an i7 core processor. And I've had people in our club actually come to me and say, well, why doesn't my tablet do this? Or why doesn't my laptop do that? Well, the first question I have is, how old is it? And what kind of processor do you have in it? And if it isn't a newer processor, it's not going to do some of those bells and whistle things like a virtual background like you have right here, or some of these other bells and whistles with happy faces and other things like that. It's just not going to be able to perform because Zoom continues to upgrade their software and they continue to put in new, as I say, bells and whistles as they go. And you're not going to be able to enjoy that. You may be able to on a limited basis, but again, if you're going to run a meeting, get yourself a newer laptop or newer equipment if you possibly can.
Yeah, we actually got a dedicated PC for the Zoom meetings for Toastmasters. I was running everything off of my personal PC for a long time. With all the stuff that I had on there, I found it difficult to hand it off to somebody when I was going to be out of town for a day. So I ended up just going and finding a small Lenovo. It's a touch screen. It was, I think, about $600 over at Best Buy. And it does everything that we need it to do.
Perfect. Perfect. And I wanted to go back so you at least had a visual on that Lenovo. It's a basic one, but it performs admirably. It is great. Let me move ahead here and let's talk about cameras here. I see we're going to skip around just a little bit. Now, you can do just about anything you want as a camera. You noticed in our previous slide, somebody was actually using a smartphone. Well, that's fine. You can do that as your primary camera. You can also use an iPad, something similar to that. What I would recommend is something that at least produces an HD signal. What I'm coming to you through right now is this camera right here. This is a Logitech 920. This produces an HD signal. It is a great signal. It is something admired the world over. And it would be a wonderful one, a wonderful addition to your meeting if you can get one of those. This camera that you see right over here is the next step beyond. It is a Logitech Brio. This is a 4K camera. We just decided to go ahead and do the extra $100 and buy that camera so we could sort of future-proof our broadcast equipment, because if things do, of course, improve, we'll be ready to go right along with it. And it produces a wonderful picture, as you would imagine it would do. The reason that we like Logitech is the fact that it is a great brand, and it also does have glass components in it, not plastic like the cheapy people do that you'll find under $100. These things are at least somewhere around $150 for something like this. This is about $100 more than that if you're buying one. And that's what you can expect to find out there. But again, get yourself a decent camera. You'll be rewarded with that investment. That's probably your biggest beyond the laptop as far as investment. Now, we did talk about audio and how important it is. And I'm going to back up here for just a quick second to see here. Yes, I knew I had skipped over a slide. You can use what's known as a lavalier mic. A lot of people are doing this. This is a very basic thing. The reason it's called a lavalier is you can see it's got a pin right here, and you can actually clip this right onto your lavalier. And you can imagine that somebody might actually hardwire this thing right into their laptop or into their iPad, and that can be your primary microphone if you want to. And this one comes recommended by some clubs. It costs about $300. It's actually a wireless lav. This little plug goes into here, sends a wireless signal over to here, which is actually hooked into your laptop or whatever device you're using. The reason that we have not gone with a lavalier type microphone or a wireless microphone is the clumsy factor. Not all people that you'll run across are used to handling microphones. They don't put them on correctly. They have to worry about distancing them correctly. Some people are rough with microphones, and of course, that will shorten the life. What we want is consistent quality. And so in this case, I thought it better to just go with hardwired microphones and something that people can keep their hands off of and still perform. And that's the route that we decided to go. So as we advance our slide here, we should be able to pull up the two different microphones we're using. The one on your left-hand side is a shotgun microphone, very directional, but a great performer. This is a Rode brand shotgun microphone, takes a little battery inside of it, produces a wonderful signal. It's a great anchor for our audio. You can see it's right on the side of our lectern here. The one that you see on the right-hand side here is a dynamic microphone. It basically picks up whatever loud noise comes near it. And this is actually on a stand out in the audience, just beyond the speaker. I'm probably going to replace this microphone at some point because I like the Rode so much. I want two of them. That's just me. As we advance here, I want to tell you that Zoom is very, very simplistic when it comes to audio. In other words, it likes to have one channel and it likes to home in on that channel. And if you want to put in more than one channel in your operation, then you're going to have to figure out how to add additional channels. In this case, this is what's known as a Focusrite Scarlett 212. This is about as basic a mic mixer as you can get. These things, you'll find them for cheap on eBay. People are selling them. You want to buy one brand new, depending on the bell and whistle that you get in here, it can be somewhere between $100 and $150. And what you're basically doing is you're feeding a microphone here, feeding a microphone here. You do have some power gain, some additional amplification. And then over here, we actually have this headphone jack right here, and we're using that, and I'll show you later, we're using that to run out to our speaker that's in the audience. And of course, we can control all the audio levels right from here, which is perfect. Once again, set it and forget it, that sort of thing. It just makes it simple. The speakers, if you're wondering about that, these are actually all variations on what would be known as a Bluetooth speaker. You guys are all probably familiar with these, depending on what size you want to use. This one right down here, not a great picture of this, but this actually is a repurposed sound bar from a sound system that a brother-in-law of mine had hooked up to his TV set. And I thought, okay, this is great. I've got this laying around the house. I'll just power it up, put a wire to it, and I hook it right into the Focusrite, and it works out great. So it's repurposed, and it works fantastic for us. And heck, we may get another one because we like more audio. More audio, good audio is great audio. As far as monitors go, we're using two different monitors, and we'll of course explain, but this is just a basic HD TV. Bought this off some guy who was dumping it for $20. Works fantastic for us. And it's always nice to have the Elks Hall outfitted with a bingo monitor, and that's what this is right here. This just hangs from the wall. It was used for their bingo games, and we just feed a signal in from an HDMI cable right out of the laptop, and all of our participants can be seen right up here. Anybody that's appearing on camera anywhere is right there in the meeting with that particular one there.
Dave, could you back up there for a second to that one
Sure,
again?
happy to do that.
Early on here, introduce a concept that whenever that projection screen is right above the lectern. If we have an in-person speaker, they're going to be standing right below that projection screen. If we have an online speaker, they're going to be up on the projection screen. So if you just think of that projection screen as an extension of the lectern, just like a normal meeting, there's one person, one speaker from the lectern, and that's always controlling the lectern. We just exchange that with an online person. So you treat that person like they're just moving up to the lectern like anybody else. It's a very seamless meeting. That's for that hands-free microphone too, or that shotgun microphone comes in handy because you don't have to trade off microphones every time somebody walks up to the lectern. It's always there. It's always on.
Great point. Great
Can I
point.
ask a question about that, Craig?
Sure, go ahead.
So if the speaker is in the room, who do we see on the monitor? Do we see them up there too?
You'll actually see when what I do is whenever there's an online speaker, I pin their video like Shelly is pinned up there. So you'll only see the people that are speaking online up there. When somebody's speaking in the room, typically I show the gallery view that's over on the left so that
Okay.
everybody in the room can see everybody else's reactions. Now that monitor on the left is the one that is facing away from you on in the next picture. So the speaker in front of the room can actually see that gallery view too. It's in front of the speaker and it's up on the screen behind them. So you
Gotcha.
can everybody can kind of get an idea of who's paying attention, who's falling asleep, and who's laughing and who's not.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And Craig has taken it upon himself to actually create a schematic of all this, being the organizational guy that he actually is. And Craig, I'm trying to advance my slides here to see if we can't look at that schematic that you have here. This thing's a little blocky.
You went too far.
Yeah, it's a little blocky, so you'll forgive me. But here is Craig's hybrid meeting setup. If you're a schematic fan, you can really go to town on this.
And this is a Visio diagram, but mainly created so that at first I would know how I plug everything in together, what's connected to what and what works, because we found a setup that works. I started taking notes and we made sure that we did it the same way every time. Now we found a simpler way to do this, but this is part of our documentation for our backups. Because believe it or not, Dave and I have in the past year and a half each missed a meeting or two. It's always nice to have a backup person that can come in and set up for us and take over for us. And the meeting can go on even if one of us gets sick at the last minute. So all of these things are labeled, they're documented, where they're stored, how they're connected. And it takes a while to follow the lines back and forth if we're going to use this. Again, we came up with a simpler way and we'll show you, but this still is part of our documentation package. And Brian has that available for anybody that would like that copy of that sort of thing too. This is our setup. You just make one that works for you.
Let's move ahead here and let's show you a little more of our setup here. You've seen some of it, but we'll kind of give you a little more of the setup and a little more of the theory here. So this is the audience view. If you were looking at it from the audience and you were looking straight forward, on your left here, we have a timing box. We're actually going to put a camera on that and we'll tell you about it. Rick here is covering up our video producer and we'll tell you a little more about that. Our audio mixer is here. We of course have one of two lights right up here. We've also got that monitor that we talked about, the monitor up on the wall. We of course have a camera over here, and then we have the second laptop over here that you see right there. And just beyond here, I did not take a picture of it. There actually is a stand with the microphone that is between the speaker right here and of course the microphone that's up at the lectern. That is to avoid potential feedback. That's what we're trying to avoid, but still get some audience reaction if we potentially can. Some additional sound.
Dave, you back up just a second again, just to complicate it.
Sure.
But just to call attention there too, that big screen is just a projection screen. It's not a camera. The laptop that you see on the right there shows the same picture, but that laptop is the room cam. That's showing all the in-person participants to everybody else that's online, even though you look at it, you see the same picture that's pinned for everybody else up there. But the other thing that I'll call attention to is the duct tape on the floor. A good roll of duct tape is always important. You want to tape down cords wherever people are going to be stepping over them. We learned the hard way that people cannot step over cords without tripping them on them. And that the main offenders there are Dave and myself. So we just tape down everything, have plenty of that around.
That's a good point, and we do appreciate that. Safety comes first. That is for certain. Now, if you were standing up at the lectern and you were actually looking out at the audience, this would be your view. You would have your audience over here. You, of course, have this monitor down below. Once the meeting gets going, we have a gallery view that's actually right here. So once we start introducing people, we can actually say, okay, all you people out in Zoom land, I'm going to call on you, have you say hello, have you introduce yourself, and we can kind of go around the horn depending on which source gets punched up. And of course, Craig's in charge of that as a video producer. This is just a basic tripod right here. And of course, the Logitech Brio is sitting right up here. Many times during a meeting, I'm running around trying to make sure that the headroom is adjusted on this camera, so the shot looks at least halfway decent, depending on the height of the individual speaker that's actually coming up to the lectern and presenting at that given time.
Now,
And again, this is go ahead.
one thing we learned there too, everybody pretty much learns on Zoom early on, is to talk to the camera, to look at the camera like they're an audience member themselves. Maintain eye contact that way. It's nice to have that little monitor in front of us so that we can see our online participants, but you want to just glance at that every so often to see what the reactions are, but really be talking to the camera. Otherwise, you're talking down, and you really can't lift that monitor up anymore, or you're going to block the in-person speaker and block their view. It's got to be off to the side someplace.
And if you think about it, this is really good practice for what is probably going to be, and I hate to use this cliche, the new normal or your future as far as dealing with coworkers, depending on where you're employed, because chances are you're going to be involved in hybrid meetings. You're going to be involved in employment interviews. They're going to require you to be able to talk to a camera and to be able to relate to it and not just stare down and look at a monitor all the time. And so this is a wonderful practice for what is now and probably is going to be the norm in the future. Now, to give you an idea, once again, of how things look once you get up to the lectern, you can see right here, we've got people lining up here to come up and introduce themselves. We've got our word of the day over here. And of course, that microphone is safely over here. So hopefully most people will not run into it or brush up against it. And of course, our camera. And we have a light up here, and we'll talk more about that here in just a moment. And this is our monitor. I know Craig's already talked about it. And what he does is he is able to pin up different sources here. And of course, use the gallery view if he wants to, that will allow people in the room to understand that they've got so many other people involved in this meeting. It really depends on what the content of the meeting is as far as what Craig is punching up.
Yep, and just to call attention to Zoom in particular, it has speaker view and gallery view. Speaker view, probably all of you know this, but it goes to who's making noise. So it will switch the video to who's talking or any kind of noise that they're making over their microphone. So often a dog barks and it will switch to that person's video. So I rarely use speaker view during a meeting. I almost always either use gallery view or I've pinned somebody up there like we have with Shelly. And basically, my rule is if an online speaker is speaking, online participant is speaking, I have them pinned. Sometimes I only have them pinned for a few seconds, but I pin them while they're speaking so that everybody can focus on that person at that time.
And this is the danger of Zoom once again, because Zoom likes one channel of audio and Zoom loves to fixate on that source of audio. So as Craig said, if a dog starts barking or if somebody starts laughing uproariously someplace in the virtual meeting, of course, Zoom wants to switch its video right over there and put it on that audio source. And that's why it's very important to pin certain sources down, especially if you have a speaker that's presenting. You don't need that interruption. Once again, the Rode microphone, this is right next to the lectern. Again, a great producer for audio and a very reliable microphone. Now, this is the Focusrite as it is being used. And you can see right here, we've got a 3-pin cable that'll go back over to the Rode microphone. This one will go over to the one that's in the room. And as you can see right here, we actually are using the headphone monitor here to run a cable out to that sound bar that I talked about. And we can adjust all the levels right here and get it to where we want. And of course, get great audio without a lot of muss and fuss on a weekly basis. The nice thing about this too is it also has a phantom preamp right here too, which boosts up the microphones and of course just makes things sound a little smoother. And you're going to find that your laptop, chances are, probably does have some preamplification in it, but anything that you can do that'll boost things a little beyond it will make things sound better.
And this is also your first view at our cheat for getting everything connected correctly. You see, we got all the different connectors labeled with numbers. Everything corresponds. You plug number 11 into number 11. This is kind of the dummy's guide to set up for the hybrid meeting. And it really works well. And we'll get another picture of that later on.
And this is the sound bar. And you remember I told you about running a hardwire cable. We could do Bluetooth with this monitor, but you know something? It is so much muss and fuss to get this thing to actually lock in on the laptop or to lock in. I don't even want to mess with it. And besides, if I'm running the Scarlett signal out to it, I really want to control that. And I want to control it from the Scarlett. And so that works very nicely. So this is sitting on a chair and it's pointed toward the audience, of course. And of course, once again, the setup that we were talking about. This is probably the most important aspect, our secret weapon in this whole broadcast, and that is a very happy video producer right here. You can see Craig. Now, if he was working for a television station, he'd be known as a technical director, a TD, but he is also a director, if you will, because he's calling the shots himself, and he's also putting in additional content in here. So he's doing about 3 to a half dozen jobs all at one time. And don't think that Craig learned all this stuff when he woke up one morning. He has actually practiced this and he has done this several times and he has missed punch cameras. I'm sure he'll tell you all about that, but it's a learning experience every time he goes out and he learns something new and it makes for a smoother broadcast because he's just able to know where he's going. Correct, Craig?
Yeah, we control everything from this one PC. Again, we may have multiple laptops for cameras, but we've only got one PC that runs the Zoom. That's the one in front of me there. Now I sit up off to the side of the lectern, pretty close to the speakers, not because I like to sit in front of the room. I'm a back of the church, left-hand side Lutheran, but our cords are too short. I have to sit up in front of the room because that's as close as far away from the lectern that I can get. But it also lets me be right in touch with the speaker. So if anybody's using a remote clicker, I'm there to help them get started with that. If they have any signals where there's timing in terms of presentation, when they want me to start sharing or stop sharing or let them speak in different fashions, I'm right there that I can catch those signals and help them out.
It's a good thing to be close by. On the opposite end of the table, and you saw this in the setup, this is the second laptop that we're using, serves a number of functions, but in this case, we'll just point out the fact that we have a camera right here at the top, and this is actually shooting back at the participants in the room. It's called Room Cam. We label it as such, and we're able to pin a different video source on this one if we want to. We can still have our Room Cam giving you a room cam image, but we can also pin the image on this particular laptop right here to a video source. And I'll tell you more about why that's valuable as we go on here. This is an example of adding a third element, a third camera into the whole mix here. So we have the one that's on the lectern, we have the one that's going out toward the audience, and now you have a third camera here, and this is going toward our timing box. You can see our Intrepid timer right here, who actually is using a camera that Craig has rigged up here. Now we've got our basic meeting setup on Ethernet right now. This is actually using an internet signal in the room on a separate channel. So it's not going to interfere or degrade our signal for our meeting. And that's a beautiful thing. But what it is pointed at is it's pointed at our, of course, timing box. And as we zoom in here, we'll go on to one more photo here. Oops. Again, this thing's a bit balky here. you can see right here where we have a nice tight shot of our timer timing lights. And as we go through that, anybody who's at home can actually look in on that timing light and can find out where they're at and figure out whether they're running over or not. And I know Craig has some thoughts about the timing element in meetings. Craig?
Yeah, for one thing, you'll notice that we almost always have our physical timer box in room, no matter whether our timer is in the room or our official timer is online, because we can have an official timer online as well. And we come up with a variety of signals. Some people change their background from red to or green to yellow to red. Yeah, with the different lights in places. Some people hold up a different type of object, a different colored object. And then the timer just gets a chance up front to explain how they're going to time, what they're going to show, if they're online like that. Otherwise, even for the in-person, we always like to have our physical box there just because it's easier for that in-person speaker to look out into the audience and see the timer box, just like we've always done it in the past. One thing about an online timer is that individual online participants are responsible for pinning that timer video so that they can see it while they're speaking. They need to have that visible so that it's not hidden by their slides, it's not hidden when they're sharing, and it's not down in gallery view someplace where they're not seeing it and they have to fumble for that. I kind of keep an eye on that as well. If I see somebody that obviously hasn't noticed their camera or the timer and pinned their timer video, I'll often, if I get somebody that is in the red category and has been there a while, I'll be chatting to them red, 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 just to help them remind that shows something other than their timer video that they may not be seeing at all.
Very good. And this is a view of what Craig is seeing as he's going through the meeting here. I do have some other tighter shots right here, but we talk about the elements in the meeting. These are our video elements. And then over here on the right, there are some controls that we can utilize. And you can see right here where Craig is actually going ahead and labeling a particular person. We have an honored guest here who came to the last meeting, and that's what Craig is doing here just before the meeting gets started. And if I go ahead, Craig, I'm
I
sorry.
was saying, when I'm producing a meeting like that, I just manage all the online participants. So I'm renaming somebody here, but I'm the one that can communicate with the people. If they have any problems, if they have any questions, if they have any comments, I'm the one that's chatting back and forth with them. And if there's something important, I can relay it over to the Toastmaster or to anybody in the room there as well. And a lot of times the Toastmaster will come over while an online speaker is doing something and say, tell the table topics master we'll have 4 topics today or 3 topics today. And I'll be the one that relays those messages back and forth. But I'm always watching to see, is anybody asking any questions? Is anybody having any problems? Is anybody making noise? Do I need to mute somebody? That sort of thing.
And here's a really nice tight shot of the controls right here, where our honored guest has decided that not only are they muted, but we're not actually going to see an image of them, which is perfectly fine if that's what they want to do. Over here, room cam, we're always going to keep that microphone turned off because otherwise we're going to have really good feedback. And somehow I don't think we really need that. But again, another view of some of the controls and some of the great detail.
We always ask, the sergeant at arms opens the meeting and asks everybody to turn themselves on mute, except for the humor component. We want them to be able to laugh and get some feedback for that. And I really don't usually have to mute people anymore. I don't have to pay a lot of attention. People have become much better behaved with Zoom over the past couple of years. People have learned how to do this. And we've mentioned it a couple of times there, as far as I always rename the online participants with their role so that people can see who's doing what. And if it's a guest, they know who's a guest and who's not. But I also send a chat to everybody right up front in the meeting with a list of all the in-room, the in-person participants as well with their roles. So the online people can know who's in the room, how many people there are, who doesn't have roles, that sort of thing as well. And if there are any guests in the physical room as well.
And to kind of give you an idea, it's just some of the backbone here of what we're doing in kind of bringing this all together. This is a wonderful USB hub. It actually has 6 options on it. And we're bringing in the camera signal right here. We're bringing in the Scarlett audio right here, a mouse USB. We also have another spot right here. So if we want to drop in a PowerPoint presentation you can do that right there. And then over here, this is the Ethernet signal being fed right into the laptop. And as far as the Ethernet signal, we wanted to actually feed not only Craig's laptop, but the secondary laptop as well. The idea is quality, the idea is signal quality, and that's what we're doing. So we got ourselves a hub to do that. And this, of course, is just a nice splitter that tries to keep all the signals at equal power. Over here, this is a great splitter right here too, because this is actually taking the TV signal and what it is doing, it taking it from the laptop, it's splitting it, it goes to that TV that you saw on the table, and this feeds the TV that you see on the wall. So you're going beyond that computer screen and you're actually projecting your program on not only the TV, but of course that big monitor that's up on the wall. It's a beautiful thing. It really helps out. And this is, of course, the Ethernet connection that's feeding into the secondary laptop right here. Once again, the whole idea is just quality. If we can potentially keep a nice signal going, a fatter, a stronger signal, that's what we're looking for. Now, we've decided to go the extra mile here and actually bring in some additional lights. We can dim these things. They're LED lights. They're relatively inexpensive. But the idea is to throw some additional, should we say, pixels at the subject and try to control the light. Many of these cameras that you're going to find, especially the Logitech, are great all by themselves without any additional light. They really do an admirable job of boosting up a video signal. But with my TV background, I just decided I wanted a little additional there when it comes to lighting. And once again, this is our producer here. The point I would make with this particular photo here is that Craig does such a wonderful job of actually pinning people side by side strategically, depending on the content in the meeting. And you can see right here, he's got his topic master on the left-hand side. And this is the person who's going to take that question. And you can see that they're both virtual, but they've got a relationship thanks to Craig. Craig, you've got more to say about this. I know you do.
This kind of follows whenever somebody is online and they're speaking, they're pinned and everybody else is over there in gallery view. We really got into the habit of doing this for evaluations, where if there's an in-person evaluator, but they've got an online evaluatee, we like to pin that evaluatee there so they can talk to that person. They can see that person's face as they're giving them feedback. Likewise, if we had them both online, I'd have them both up here just like this. And one thing we also do occasionally, depends on the person, when I'm the evaluatee and I'm in the room, but my evaluator is online, I'll go stand up at the lectern, so I'll be on camera so they can be talking to me as well. So I have to get up and walk up there, but it allows them to see my face and get my feedback as we're doing that. But basically, again, when anybody is online and they're speaking, I pin that. I can only pin people for the in-room meeting and for my PC here. I can't pin it for the online participants. They're responsible for pinning their own videos and making their own display look the way they want it to do.
It's a good point. It's a very good point, because we have at least one of our members who thinks it's otherwise. But you know, that's the way things go. But that's our basic setup right there, and you're getting a bit of a philosophy here as to how we set it up. Now, will we be making different changes to this? Will we be doing different things? We're always thinking about different innovations. We've even added a fourth camera to the broadcast, wherein we had one of our speakers who decided that they had to be out in front of the lectern, and they had a particular prop that they wanted to use as far as their speech. So we rigged up another cell phone and used that as a rover cam, and actually went and put a lavalier microphone on him and plugged that into the mic mixer that you saw right there. And as long as we tested it out ahead of time and we knew exactly what we had and the quality was right, it went without a hitch. As soon as we went to that particular audio channel, as soon as Craig was able to punch up that camera, it was perfect. It was seamless. So that is an idea of what you can do with it. You can get the basics down, and then you can decide to innovate and experiment and have fun, add additional cameras, whatever your bandwidth And of course, your amount of people that you have that can allow you to pull it off in a professional fashion will allow you to do. And Craig, I think you've got some best practices. I know you've included some right here, and I'll let you take it away here, if you will.
Well, this is just a screenshot of the top part of the sheet. There's actually about 30 or so best practices and tips that we've got on there. And Brian has that document. He has the setup wireframe that we had showed earlier. And there's also a checklist for setting up my piece of the meeting that I hand off to somebody when somebody's going to back me up for when I have to be gone. And it's very tailored to chamber Toastmasters. Both these things are, of course, but you can make that adaptation to your meeting. I just wanted to present the level of detail that I give to my backup. Not that I'm a control freak or anything, but when somebody just has to go in cold and do the things that I do every week almost without thinking, and a lot of times without thinking, it helps them to have a good checklist that they know when they've got to do something and in what order to do things in. So Brian, I think you have those documents ready, and if anybody wants them, they're out there.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay.
And that first recommendation that you have there is so crucial. Don't just make this something that a couple of people in your meeting do and that's it. If you want to consistently do this, start cross-training people, find people that are enthusiastic about it and get them involved in it, and have them sit in and play producer on an average meeting and get to know it. That's really a good thing. And besides, it creates a better team atmosphere. And another thing we've discovered that creates a great team atmosphere is we generally have most club members stay afterward and try to break down all the equipment that we've set up. It usually takes us about a half hour to about 45 minutes to get everything set up the way that we want it before the meeting starts. And these folks can usually break things down in about 15 to 20 minutes or less. And it is so nice for somebody to just grab one piece of equipment and bag it up or box it up. And that's really a great team activity. And it's something that will help with your club.
The other thing about getting other people involved is something Colleen just brought up here, where she uses the spotlight feature versus the pin feature that I use for the video. I'm not familiar with that, so I'm learning something here just by having somebody else give some feedback with the way they do things or figured out how to do things. So Dave, I'll try to mess up our meeting tomorrow by spotlighting people versus pinning people. We'll see how clumsy I can be at that and what I can learn tomorrow morning.
Well, it should be an interesting meeting.
one other thing though, on the takedown and setup kind of thing, because we're in that bingo hall, in that bar area, we have to set up and take down every week for every meeting. If you're fortunate enough to have a conference room that has the camera set up and permanently mounted that way, some of that setup and takedown goes away. Some of that detailed connection factor goes away. And depending on the size of your group, you might be able to get by with just having a conference room with a camera without any extra microphones, without any extra cameras in there, if everybody fits around that conference room and wants to get cozy in that little room. I have another group where we have about 5 people in the group, and we're able to get by with either one laptop and nothing else, or in a conference room that has a fixed camera in there and a screen, and we don't have to do any takedown or setup. We simply turn on the meeting and away we go.
Again, you have to figure out what works best for you. And I would just encourage you to start small, start simple, and then continue to iterate and innovate and figure out what it is that is working well and what it is that you could do to add on to improve it, improve the quality, and just make it a better meeting for everybody, depending on your budget, depending on your means and what you're able to do on a weekly basis.
Thank you. Excellent, excellent, excellent presentation. Lots and lots of tips. Some things that I learned back in 2011, 2012 timeframe. Those microphones are highly important. If you want to hear, if you're a remote participant and you are trying to hear what's going on in that room, and everybody goes off to the side and discusses something, I couldn't hear it. I was remote. anyway, thank you so much for sharing. And now I know who to hire.
Hire Dave. He has all the stuff.
I guess
Hire a good meeting producer.
Yeah. You're both hired. And yes, I would like to ask if there are any questions that people want for a little further information on, or we do have some presentation materials that we will be adding to the website, as well as this recording. We're going to try and get that as well. But Georgette, Starlet, any further questions?
I think this is a great starting point. Unfortunately, with Mayo and not allowing people in conference rooms, that's my club right at noon. I can't really move them anyplace. No one's going to go anyplace. They aren't going to be by me, I can tell you that. So, and I go to Mayo conference rooms by myself, so I don't have to have a mask to do my own meeting. And I can't even get the cameras in those rooms to work for me. So I just have my own laptop for my Zoom meeting.
Yeah. Yeah. And so many of the clubs in Rochester utilize Mayo facilities. And that's one reason why we're still on Zoom in a lot of the clubs that I belong to here in Rochester, because Mayo doesn't let us use the conference rooms. And that's understandable. We're still in the pandemic.
I'll put in a little plug here. I have my office in co-working space called the Collider, which is in the Biobusiness Building, second on the Skyway level. And we do rent out conference rooms, by the hour or whatever as needed. So it's a short walk from Mayo. If you really want to have a meeting with people in a conference room, I have a solution for you.
Okay, we have that in recording. So thank you so much, Greg.
Now I just have to get members from Rochester and not all over the country. This was very helpful. Thank you. I've seen your schematic before, but for someone who tech is like this for me, it was helpful to be able to take a lot of notes.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Very, very helpful. Yeah, I used to carry along a whole pile of things to an in-person Toastmasters meeting. I used to keep it in the trunk of my car. For years, I did that. And wow. And then adding everything that we're talking and saw this evening to that, that would really be awesome. I don't think I have a big enough car. Anyway, I guess other questions that anyone may have.
I don't have a question, but I just want to thank Dave and Craig again. Dave, you never cease to amaze me what you do when it comes to video production. The talent and the creativity is just off the charts. So I just thank you for spending this time with us tonight. And Craig, it's you being his right arm. That's definitely appreciated your time here tonight. We will be uploading the video and the best practice sheets to the D6 website. The Club Growth has a homepage on the D6 website that I'll be getting that out. I have shared that out on Facebook, and I will be sending that information out as well. So it's just packed full of resources, but as we do these special speakers that come in and we record our meetings, we'll have that up there as well, because this is definitely a tool that we can use to help our clubs.
And I'll just extend the invitation again, if any of you want to see this in action, tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock over at Charlie's Chamber Toastmasters.
I may take you up next Thursday on a day off if I can get my butt out of bed early enough.
Stop on by, or we'll see you online.
Awesome. Awesome.
Sounds
Yes,
great.
indeed. I do plan on visiting at some point here, not probably next meeting, but in the future, I will try and attend. I really want to see this in action. Thank you again, both.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.